So welcome to session 2 on coupling and workflow data workflows. So first up we have Wendi Liu from STFC in the Scientific Computing Department to talk about ParaSiF, a partitioned fluid structure interaction simulation framework.
My name is Wendi Liu, and today I'm going to give an overview of our recent work on the ParaSiF code development, which is the partitioned fluid structure interaction simulation framework. The motivation behind of the development of the ParaSiF code is a need of the multiphysics and more precisely fluid structure interaction simulations. There are a highly demand in the industrial and the scientific field on the multiphysics or fluid structure interaction or aeroacoustics, something like that. The highly demand in this area. And we need to find a simulation tool to predict and simulate these kind of things. And due to the nonlinear or time-dependent nature of most of the multiphysics cases, the simulation tool is usually quite challenging to develop. According to some of the projects that involved in our group, we need some simulation tool to simulate multiphysics cases, such as fluid structure interaction, with extendable feature so that we can keep adding new physics into this simulation tool. And we also need it to be flexible so that different codes have different type of advantages on tackle problems. And we need this tool to be easy to swap to different types of solvers so that to tackle with different types of problems. And we also need the simulation tool to be scalable so that we can simulate large problems usually involving billions of degree of freedoms or cells. And one typical example of such complicated system multi-physical case to be simulated is floating offshore wind turbine, as shown over here. You can see it contains a flexible, slender mooring lines. It will involve some flow structure interaction, VIVs, vortex-induced vibration, and so on. And it contains the floating platforms, which will involve in some kind of wave structure interaction with with floating bodies. And it also, nowadays the floating offshore wind turbine is very large, and the tower part and the blade will involve in some kind of aeroelasticity. And all of these things are kind of multi-physics nature, and we need to find a tool to simulate such kind of case. So we developed the ParaSiF code. It is a partitioned code. We build up the ParaSiF code to focus on fluid structure interaction as a starting point, and we will continuously adding new physics to make it become a full multi-physics simulation tool. And at this stage, the ParaSiF code can tackle with fluid structure interaction, and the flow chart is shown over here. On the left-hand side, we can see it is a computational fluid dynamic solver, and currently we implemented the OpenFOAM version 6 to simulate the fluid flows, and both single-phase and multi-phase solvers have been implemented. And on the right-hand side, we have the computational structure mechanics code. We involve Phoenix, currently implemented in Phoenix version 2019.1.0, and both linear or hyperelastic model have been involved into the structure solver. And in the middle, we have the interface communicator to exchange data. We use MUI version 1.0 to exchange data between them. And a typical fluid structure interaction case will be like this. When we start the simulation, it will involve a number of time steps. And in each time step, in order to make it implicit coupling and stable, we involve a number of sub-iterations between the fluid and structure domains. And in each sub-iteration, the fluid solver will receive the deformation information of the deformation of structure from structure solver and update the fluid flow and calculated the forces in the surface of the structure. And it will push the data, the forces of the structure to the structure solver. And then the structure solver received the forces, updated the deformation, and predict the displacement and push back to the fluid solver. And a number of such sub-iteration will be carried out inside one time step, and a number of time steps will be carried out to simulate a whole time history of the case. And we will go through the different elements one by one for the details. The first one is the left-hand side, which is the fluid solver. Currently, we use OpenFOAM implemented into the ParaSiF code. And we will use we have extended the built-in solver inside OpenFOAM to simulate the Navier-Stokes equations, incompressible Navier-Stokes equations. And we make some extension to that built-in solver. It includes to fetch the displacement information and apply that to the fluid structure interface inside the fluid solver and provide the fluid forces in each element, in each cell, and to push that information to the structure domain. And for the structure part, on the right-hand side of the flowchart, we use Phoenix, and we have implemented the linear elastic and hyperelastic. For the linear elastic model, it can tackle the small deformation with a small strain to make the model valid. For the hyperelastic, it has to be, it can reach to a large deformation, but still small strain. And in the middle, which is a core part of the ParaSiF framework, we use MUI as the data exchange. And MUI is core developed by our group as well. It can provide it can transfer the data between different solvers by using a cloud of points of data through the MPI. And it can push and fetch point clouds. It's based on the non-blocking MPI send, but blocking fetch, blocking receive. And it contains a number of spatial or temporal interpolations, including radial basis function. I will come back to that later because it will be used by the fluid structure interaction. And it has good extendability. It gives us the flexible to extend and involve in more solver or physics domains. Let's take an example, a highly abstract example. Suppose we have two different applications, application A and B. They have different discretization method. And by using MUI, the first step is MUI will interpret these information and generate the point clouds. And then the point clouds contains different time series. And MUI, the other application will, based on the point clouds, use the spatial or temporal interpolator, depends on the data, depends on the case it simulated, and receive the useful information from that point clouds of data. And in theory, we can extend it to an arbitrary number of applications by using MUI to involve in the simulation. That is, give us a good extendability and flexibility to involve in more physics into the simulation tool. And for fluid structure interaction itself, in the fluid structure interface, there are a number of boundary conditions we need to meet so that to make it the simulation valid. More precisely, we need to follow the kinematic condition to ensure the displacement at the fluid structure interface have to be consistency between the two domains. And we also need to follow the dynamic conditions so that to make the integration of the forces from the fluid solver and the structure solver at the fluid structure interface to be conserved. And for the dynamic condition specifically, as I mentioned in my previous slide, we use radial basis function to ensure that the conservation of the forces into the fluid structure interface. And for the radial basis function, it is built in a spatial sampler inside MUI. There are a number of basis functions to choose from the Gaussian-based basis function to high-order polynomial basis functions to give us different choices according to the case. And for fluid structure interaction, we are two-way implicit coupling between fluid solver and the structure solver. In order to make it fully implicit and stable, we have implemented different algorithms for the fluid structure interaction. We have the fixed relaxation method and the Aitken's method and the interface Cauchy-Newton method. The first two, the fixed relaxation and the Aitken's method, it is can be classified as the Gauss-Sedgwick iterative method, and the Cauchy-Newton is a little bit different from the other two. And we come back to test cases. We have established the fluid structure interaction framework, and we carry out a number of test cases to validate the accuracy and, of the framework. The first test case is a two-dimensional flow path rigid body in front of an elastic beam. And the incoming flow in this case is a parabolic incoming flow feature. And as you can see, we compared our velocity domain with the literature. And we also carried out quantitatively validation with the displacement of the tip of the beam with the published data. And this animation shows how it looks like, how the domain is deformed. The deformation of the domain in both the CFD part and the CSM part, I use arbitrary Lagrangian or Larry method to tackle the mesh motion. And the next test case is a three-dimensional case. It's a flow path of flexible beam. We compared our results with the published data. And you can see this is animation shows the how it looks like in the time history. And we also compared our velocity contour with published data. It's qualitatively ballpark. And we also compared the quantitative value with the published data. And the errors for the, there are two different cases have been simulated. One with a firmer flexible beam. The other is a more softer, which is involved in the hyperelastic solver inside the structure solver. And both gave relatively good results. And we also simulated a more challenging case, which is a three-dimensional flow path a hydrofoil. And the hydrofoil have a kind of vortex-induced vibration motions. And the results is compared with the wind tunnel experimental data. We picked up three typical points for our simulation. One is in the coupling region. The other two are lock-in and the lock-off region. And we compare the frequencies and the standard deviation of the amplitude of the trailing edge of the hydrofoil. And as we can see, it's matched very well with the experimental data. And from the simulation, we can generate the instantaneous structural vibration at the trailing edge of the hydrofoil. And we can also generate a fast Fourier transition for the time series data to produce the power spectral of the displacement. And we can also generate some contour graph for the deformation of the hydrofoil. And all of these above test cases are in the single phase, which will only involve in water or air. And now we extended the simulation to a two-phase, which involve both water and air. And more importantly, we need to simulate the free surface by using volume of fluid. And the first test case for the multi-phase simulation of fluid structure interaction is a two-dimensional hydrostatic water column on top of an elastic plate. And as you can see, this is a diagram of the case. There's a water column, and on the bottom, there is an elastic aluminum plate. And this is the simulation results of the contour. This is the pressure, and this is the, on the bottom, this is the strength of the aluminum plate. And we compared our results with the published data. Again, it matches very well with the experiments. And we also carried out the transient case for the multi-phase fluid structure interaction simulation. And this case, a rolling tank, and on the bottom, on the middle bottom of the rolling tank, we have an elastic beam. And when the tank is rolling, the fluid inside the tank will make the beam flexible. And we carry out this simulation compared with the experimental data and other numerical simulation results. Again, it matches very well with the experimental data, and we compared our phase contour with the experiments and the other numerical simulation results. Again, it matches very well. And we applied this established framework onto the real scientific research. One example is our recent published paper by using the ParaSiF framework to simulate the sorption-induced damping case. The background of this case is to investigate the interaction between the wing of airplane and the inside fuel tank. You know, during operation, one airplane, in the operation of the airplane, is usually encounter some turbulence in the air or gust. And in that case, we will experience some kind of aeroelasticity for the airplane wings. And during the aeroelasticity, the fuel tank inside the airplane will have some kind of interaction with the aeroelasticity motion of the airplane. And we are trying to investigate how the interaction goes and whether the sloshing fuel tank can provide some kind of sloshing damping to the aeroelasticity behavior of the airplane. And we employed the very highly simplified model. We have a very long beam. You can see over here inside the structure domain. And in the fluid domain, we have a half-filled fuel tank. And we investigated different initial excitation forces to the top of the airplane. And we also investigated whether we involve some kind of compartment, what happens to the sloshing damping. And we calculated the sloshing damping in different parameters. And we also investigated the details of each cycle of the sloshing damping. And we generated some contours on the time instance of different compartments, what happens to the sloshing behavior. We have tested the scaling performance of this ParaSiF framework. Theoretically, we have some papers have published with the MUI itself, and it received good scalability with very large number of data points for data exchange. And now we want to see whether we use MUI and also employ both fluid and structure solvers inside. Can we receive a good scalability as well? And this is a preliminary research on the scalability of the ParaSiF framework we carried out in Scaffold Pack a number of years ago. It is based on the three-dimensional channel flow over elastic beam, which I have shown. And we involved in 83 million hexahedral cells in CFD domain, and we involved 2.5 million degree of freedoms of tetrahedral elements in the structure domain. And as you can see, the parallel efficiency for about 1,000 MPI tasks can reach to 68%. And some ongoing work is still carrying out at the moment to further enhance the scalability of the whole framework so that we can tackle very large problems such as a floating offshore wind turbine we have discussed. Some future works. One of the ongoing work, which is not shown over here, is the upgrading of both the fluid solver, structure solver, as well as the MUI to a latest version. And some other works include to carry out some wave structure interaction cases simulations by using the established ParaSiF framework, which are the needs for our recent projects, and further enhance the scalability towards X scale, which I have discussed in my previous slide, and also incorporate fundamentally different method for both fluid and structure domains. For example, we can implement the SPH solver as the alternative of the fluid solver. And before I finish, I would like to show the flow chart and the abstract diagram by using MUI again. And I would like to highlight that although currently ParaSiF code is for fluid structure interaction and other multi-physics simulations at the moment, but the code coupling paradigm which we involved are more than fluid structure interaction or the multi-physics simulations that we are currently working on. Actually, as shown over here, it gives a great potential for other, for general audience, for other fields to involve in this kind of code-code coupling to provide multi-code simulations for different kinds of field and different kinds of problems. So that's me. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Wendi. Interesting talk. Is there any questions?
Thank you very much. I have two questions. Maybe the first one, and maybe I missed it. How do you deal with the time integration, both for the fluid and the structure part?
Time integration, you mean?
Is it explicit, implicit? Is it a mix of different schemes?
I would say the time integration is implicit because of the solver we involved. In the CFD part, it is an implicit method to simulate the pressure, the momentum equations, and in the structure as well. So it's the time integration is fully implicit. And if we involve in some fundamentally different methods, for example, SPH method and so on, we may involve in explicit time marching scheme. And at that time, we may find another way for fluid structure interaction according to the nature of the solver.
Thank you. And I have another question. So in the introduction, you show some nice floating wind farms, or wind turbines, sorry. How far are you from simulating such a complex
It's a very, very good question. As you know, to provide such kind of high complex simulation is always challenging. I cannot give you a timeline at the moment, but I would say we are working very hard towards that kind of simulation.
Thank you, Wendi, for sharing your cutting-edge research. Just my curiosity, also to address a problem in time, but here I would like to know if you have any constraint in time step, and are the time step between the two modules, CFD and CSM, the same or different, and how did you deal with that?
Okay, it's a very good question. Currently, the time marching on the CFD and the CSM are in the same pace, but theoretically we can make it different. As I mentioned in MUI, we have a number of temporal sampler as well. It is a very typical case when we simulate multi-scale cases. Currently, we talk quite a lot for multi-physics, but when we move to multi-scale simulations, different time step is needed. So at that time, we can make use of the temporal sampler, for example, the temporal average or sum or anything else, according to the need for the coupling nature or the case nature. And we can provide such kind of different pace of time marching between different solvers. It is theoretically possible, but I haven't involved in my research because we are not involved in any multi-scale simulation at the moment.
Okay, we've got time for more.
What's the turbulence model you used? What's the turbulence model?
Turbulence model, okay. It's a very good question. The test cases I have shown, most are laminar. And for the sloshing case, it involves in turbulence model. And what we use is K omega SST, is that right, Omar? Yes. And Omar has led a research by looking at different turbulence models inside OpenFOAM. And according to his research, we pick up K omega SST for that sloshing case. But it's an ongoing work, and we have found some very interesting things inside the turbulence model, and maybe Omar will be present in the next time.
Okay, how you calculate your Freund number?
Freund number?
Yes, in your rolling tag. Ratio between characteristic velocity and your gravity, inertial force and your gravity force.
Yeah, for the rolling tank case, I didn't calculate Freund number for that. Actually, it is not a parametric study. It is just a one simulation case, so that it's a benchmark case, so that to compare the time history with the experimental data. But I think the Freund number is a fixed value. I haven't calculated that.
Thank you. I think we should move on. Please thank Wendi again.